Good morning. Today we're going to be taking a look at how we can work with our bucket list item a little bit better. We previously made it so we could go through and simply just add the components into the list and have it be functional. But now we want to make it so instead of just loading the actual text values, we can actually link the data that we're working with and tie that directly into the app. We'll also make it so we can add some more features and functionality, like go ahead and going in from the screen and back in, and having more functionality attached to this. So we can do like the edit button as you see above, and the update so we can add more components. So to do that, let's go ahead and take a look, starting with our bucket detail. That's where we're going to start off with the work for that. So we'll go ahead and switch over to Xcode to do that now. And I'm inside my bucket detail. As you look inside the bucket detail, you'll notice that the first thing we did is we commented out the two data members, the let author and let content, we were previously using when we were talking about the actual author and content we're displaying just as a text value inside the bucket list item on the detail screen. And so when we're taking that bucket detail, we're going to change that off and we're going to replace it instead with an app binding var. The app binding is how I can link back to some existing value and I can bring that in so I can get access to it. We're starting in the bucket detail because that's the deepest level we go, and that way we can build up and build up. And as we go through and add more functionality, it's available for us all the way through. So that's where we're starting inside the bucket detail. And so I made a bucket item. It is of course a bucket list item that we've been working with over in our model group the entire time. And the only change we have to make inside the actual body part of the code is I have to change the text. Instead of referring to those previous two lets of author and content, we want to actually look inside our bucket item and ask it for the associated creature and goal values so that for that data itself is accurately represented directly from the actual bucket item itself. So it's like me taking to a debug duck. And when I talk to the debug duck, I'm asking it, hey, debug duck, what's your name? Hey, debug duck, what is your value? And it's asking that information directly for it so we can store that directly into the associated labels that we're putting inside our screen right there. The other change we have to make inside our detail is because we're using that binding data, unless we want to do a little bit of extra work, we have to take out the struct because the struct no longer can link to that binding data. So all I did on mine is I simply commented out. It's totally okay though if you want to delete that and move on, because since we're not using that anymore, you can go ahead and just simply remove that. It's great for building the basic structure like we did when we're doing just the text values. But now that the data is bound to a bucket list item, we no longer will be using that associated preview. So that's why it's taken out of that right there. We're no longer using it going from there. So that's been commented out and out of the way. Now that we've got that commented and set up inside our bucket detail, the next step is to go to our bucket item cell, the one that calls the actual bucket detail. So we'll go to bucket item cell next. And as you can see inside bucket item cell, I also start off with that. We still have a struct that we're going to be working with for our preview. I create a bucket item, passing it to the parameter current bucket, and I create a bucket item using my bucket list item parameters of my struct right there, and simply load it right there. Inside the actual bucket item cell, I've replaced again the author and content parameters or data members with a reference for @state. @state is the corresponding property modifier to app binding. So app binding is what gets bound to the state value, so it links back to this one. So over here inside the state, it then links over to the binding, so I can grab that right there. The way we access that is seen right here inside my navigation link. In my navigation link previously, I made a buckets detail and I passed it the strings we're working with. But because now I'm actually linking to the data that's using that app binding, I use the $ modifier. That symbol right there says I'm hooking to the actual data. So this current bucket with the $ modifier is the bound value of that state. So it's the actual currently linked value inside that. So you need to make sure you definitely access that $ in front of that so you can get the appropriate state link to that. And that's how we're making that happen. Inside the actual stack itself, we look inside, again, just like we did inside bucket detail, I'm going to reference the current bucket.goal. Because right here, it's at that regular var level, it does not have the $ on it because I'm not hooking it to anything. So here inside the actual body itself, there is no hook, so no $ to prefix it. However, when I hook it to data, that's where I send it as a bucket item parameter over here to bucket detail. When I hook it to the data, that is when I use that associated $ prefix so it can link that data to it. So just as a reminder, when I have the @state, I link it to the associated binding by using that $. And we'll be seeing this in a couple more examples inside this project as we work along. And so again, we have the @state, which means it's important data we're going to keep track of. The @state variable is linked to an associated app binding value. And so that @state data and the app binding value have a direct link together, and we access that with the $. One of my students today talked about how it's like an S sign with a hook, and so that hook right there is how I hook it up. And that's what the $ symbol is, how I make that connection. You can see right here, there's the comment on the long press gesture. We'll take a look at that again a little bit later. Right now that's coming out because we are not using it, so no big deal. And we'll take about that in another video, so no worries there, just skip it and move on. Finally, the last thing we have to do is when we're looking at this new use of the current bucket item right there using the @state data, we need to go to our data view. And inside right here, inside our section for the bucket store, that we just change it so instead of passing a bucket string, the text out of that, I simply use the current bucket that I initialized right there, and I pass it the current bucket right there from the bucket inside that for each. And so I can use that now value so I can link it directly to the bucket right there. I still need to generate the icon by calling the self.generateRandom emoji and self.randomString as the parameter for that, so I can make that happen. That's all it takes to make it so I can go ahead and link the @state data and the @binding values of my bucket items. Of course, I could go through and add that information to my other data type as well if I wanted to do the corresponding changes to the candy cell and a candy deal screen. That would be a little bit more advanced and something we're not doing for this project, but that's what you could do to make that happen again, so you can make it and add so the @state. So again, just as a quick review, to make it so you can use the @state and @binding values to link data from one screen to another and have that link across, we start off at the deepest item inside our thing, which in this case is the bucket detail. In the bucket detail, I bind the value I'm working with. It's a bucket item. So use the @binding for that. I then reference that as a bucket item down here. Again, because it's the binding, notice that there's not a $ that's prefixing it. It's just the one that's linked back to it. I link to that binding from the state inside my bucket item cell. And I do that with the $ prefix right here when I initialize my bucket detail in the navigation link. And that's how I reference the actual value so it can cross from screen to screen so I can attach it directly from that. And finally, just when I'm inside the actual thing, I just reference the regular bucket list item with current bucket. And that's what I talked to you right here. I only use the $ again when I'm talking for that associated state binding link. So when this becomes from a state and I send it to be a bound value, I use the $ prefix to make sure that happens. And when I simply initialize the original value, when I put that bucket item in here, all I have to do is inside data view, when I create the value, is I simply pass the bucket itself, because when I'm passing it to the state value, there's no change that has to happen. It's all the same. That's good to go. And that's how you can make it so you can add state to a variable and work with that inside your project. Thanks again. Have a great day. We'll continue working on this later. Cheers.